as soon as they walk in the door and let them hurry right back to the assembly. If there are staff members who are listening, this would be a good time to get to your assembly members and let them know that they can be heard immediately upon arrival. As long as we're waiting, what I'd like to do is identify those measures where there is no opposition. As I work my way through the file, I do not have any opposition listed on file for agenda item number 2. This is AB 1507 Liu. Is there anyone here who is here to oppose AB 1507, agenda item number 2? All right. If not, then if Assemblymember Liu were able to join us, we would be able to take that matter up as soon as the assembly member arrives. Then we have no opposition listed on agenda item number 3, which is AB 1674 by Assemblymember Saldana. Is there anyone here in opposition to AB 1674 by Assemblymember Saldana? If not, we can take that item up as soon as Assemblymember Saldana can be available. On item number 5, there's no opposition, and that item is a consent calendar item. On Assembly Member Perez, Manuel Perez's AB 2202, this is item number 6. We have no opposition listed in the file. Is there anyone here who's opposed to that measure? All right, then that's another one we could take up immediately upon arrival. On AB 2379 by Assemblymember Fuhr. This is our file item number 8. No opposition listed on the file. Do we have any opposition here today? Okay. The Assembly is in session, and we've put out a call for members who might be able to step away and then return and add on if that's possible. Assembly item number, Assembly Bill AB 2776, which is the Water Parks and Wildlife Committee. That item has no opposition, but is on our consent calendar. And there is no opposition to AJR 26, which is item number 10. And that's by Assemblymember Chesbro. So those are items which we could take up as soon as we had an author. Yes, and if there's an authorization letter from a member asking staff to present, given the fact that we are still waiting on the Assembly session, that would allow the committee to proceed as well. So the bills where we have no opposition and could take the bills up immediately are item number 3 by Assemblymember Saldana, AB 1674. Item number 6 by Assemblymember V. Manuel Perez. Item number 8 by Assemblymember Fuhr. That's AB 2379. And then AJR 26. That is Assemblymember Chesbro. And then I believe I skipped over Assemblymember Liu, which is item number 2, AB 1507. And Sergeants, if we had a fourth member, we could at least do the consent calendar. So if you can again, help us with committee members. Great work, sergeants. Really honored. So there we go. Let's begin by calling the roll.
Simitian.
Here.
Runner. Corbett. Here. Hancock. Here. Lowenthal. Havley. Here. Strickland. F4.
Quorum has been established, and we have a motion on the consent calendar from Senator Corbett. Without objection, call the roll on the consent calendar, please.
Simitian.
Aye.
Simitian, aye. Runner. Corbett. Aye. Corbett, aye. Hancock. Aye. Hancock, aye. Lowenthal. Pavley. Aye. Pavley, aye. Strickland. It's 4 yes.
4-0. The consent calendar is approved, but we will hold the roll open for absent members. And I believe Assemblyman Perez?
Yes, sir.
If you'd like to come forward, we're happy to take up items which are either on consent, have already been taken up, and good for you. And then you also have another item, file item 6, which has no opposition, and we're taking items where there is no opposition while our Republican colleagues are still in their caucus.
Sure.
So your timing is good, and no opposition bodes well. So why don't we ask you to briefly present on this item, and we'll take it right up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. We're going to be talking about AB 2202.
That's it.
Sure. Last fall, AB 1079 was signed into law requiring the California-Mexico Border Relations Council to develop a strategic plan to guide the cleanup of the New River, which is in my district. To support the cleanup efforts, the 2010 water bond included a $20 million authorization for water quality and public health projects on the New River. However, the bond funding included no agency oversight and no minimum implementation guidance. Contingent on the passage of the water bond proposition this November, AB 2202 would specifically require that any appropriation from the New River bond funding must be consistent with the strategic plan for the New River cleanup. Additionally, the bill would clarify that the Secretary of Cal EPA, as chair of the California-Mexico Border Relations Council, would oversee the legislature's appropriation of these funds. AB 2202 attempts to provide necessary bond implementation language that will ensure greater accountability to taxpayers for public bond dollars. In closing, I ask for your vote, and I have John McCall here to provide any technical assistance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Witnesses
members.
in support?
Thank you.
Briefly, please.
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, members, John McCall representing the Calexico New River Committee, a community group in Calexico has been working on cleanup, and be happy to answer any questions you may have on the bill.
Thank you. Are there any other witnesses in support? Are there any witnesses in opposition? Witnesses in opposition. Seeing and hearing none, are there questions from members of the committee?
I would be glad to move the bill if appropriate.
We have a motion from Senator Pavley. Any close, Assembly member?
I respectfully ask for your vote.
Call the roll.
Simitian.
Aye.
Simitian, aye. Runner. Corbett. Aye. Corbett, aye. Hancock. Aye. Hancock, aye. Lowenthal. Aye. Lowenthal, aye. Pavley. Aye. Pavley, aye. Strickland. 5-0.
5-0. You have sufficient votes, but we're going to hold the roll open for absent members. Again, no opposition on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Appreciate your breaking free, Assembly member. Do we have other members? We do. Assembly member Liu, thank you very much. You're here on file item number 2, which is AB 1507, and our understanding is there's no opposition. And
Correct.
Welcome to the committee, and please present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'd like to begin by accepting the committee's suggested amendment on page 4 of your analysis. And with that, this bill, AB 1507, would modernize our state agency's ability to combine air quality program funds and climate change program funds to create incentives for enhanced projects that create greater benefits for air quality and increase reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. It basically allows funds from AB 118 and also the CAR Memorial Program to be combined with other federal funds. It's sponsored by CalSTART, and I have with me a witness here in support.
Thank you very much. If your witness would introduce himself, and please be brief. No opposition on the bill.
Thank you, Chair and members. Reed Addis on behalf of CalSTART in support.
Thank you very much. Any other witnesses in support? Are there any witnesses in opposition? My understanding, Assemblymember, is that you may be continuing to do some work with ARB. Just want to encourage you to make sure that the committee staff is kept informed as you continue your work on the measure.
Will do.
Thank you very much. Questions? None? Motion?
Motion?
Motion do pass with amendments.
Yes.
Thank you.
As amended.
As amended, call the roll.
Simitian.
Aye.
Simitian, I. Runner. Corbett.
Aye.
Corbett, I. Hancock. Hancock, I. Lowenthal. Lowenthal, I. Pavley. Pavley, I. Strickland. It's 5-0.
You have sufficient votes, Assemblymember, but we're going to hold the roll open so that absent members may add on if they wish. Thank you very much. Appreciate your breaking away from the Assembly. Do we have other authors who are present on measures where there is no opposition? And regrettably, Assemblymember Huffman, there is opposition on your bill because our Republican colleagues are still in their caucus. We're going to hold off on bills that where there is opposition. As soon as they break out of their caucus, we'll take up the bills in file order, which will put you at the front of the line when that time comes. All right, thank you. Why don't we ask if we could lift the call again on the consent calendar so that members who are absent for consent can add on, and that won't be a chore we have to do at the end of the hearing. And your mic's not on, if we could ask. There we go.
Consent calendar, present vote 4-0. Renner. Lowenthal.
Aye.
Lowenthal, I. Strickland. 5-0.
Vote is 5-0 on the consent calendar. That is sufficient, but we're going to hold the roll open for absent members. Going back to our regular agenda, other measures where we have no opposition. File item 3, Assemblymember Saldana, if she can make herself available, that would be great. We're ready to proceed. And file item 8, Assemblymember Feuer, if Assemblymember can make himself available, that would be great. We are ready to proceed. And file item 10, AJR 26, that's Assemblymember Chesbro. If he can make himself free, we are ready to proceed. And again, members, we understand our Assembly colleagues are struggling with the fact that Assembly is still in session and they're going to break away as soon as they're free. And we also have Republican colleagues on the Senate side who are in caucus, and we agreed that we could proceed with items where there was no objection, where there was no opposition. Yes, Senator Lowenthal.
I'm just wondering about the rules. To have a quorum, do you need a minority party member present for a quorum?
It's my understanding that we do not. It has been the custom and the practice as a courtesy to both parties to ensure that a member of both parties is present.
Right, but that's not...
not to establish a quorum. Senator Runner's been very good about working with us over the years.
I'm fine. I just didn't know what the rules were.
And in this case, as I say, the understanding we had was we wanted to go ahead and get started to try and move members through the business of the day, but we agreed we would hold off on items where there was opposition. So at this point, we're hoping that Assembly members
We have a lot of Republicans.
Saldana, Feuer, and Chesbro or their staffs might be able to join us and present on these items where there is no opposition. And we thank the members of the public for their patience.
So we're only doing bills without opposition?
Right. Until they come.
All right.
And Assemblymember Huffman, now that we are joined by the Vice Chair of the committee, your timeliness will be rewarded and you can step right up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senators. I'm here to present on AB 234. This is a bill that will require all marine transfer units to deploy boom prior to commencing an oil transfer operation in California. The intent here is to maximize containment from oil spills in order to prevent the kind of economic and ecological damage that I think is fresh in all of our minds. With the Gulf spill incident so timely, I don't really need to remind you about the devastating impact an oil spill can have here in California. One can imagine the devastating impacts both on commercial and recreational fishing, but also on our entire economy. And of course, a spill of that size would have ripple effects up and down the whole west coast of our country. And I think the bottom line is it's incumbent upon us to do everything that we can to continue to position California at the front edge of policies and practices that will help prevent and contain these incidents. Pre-booming is not a silver bullet, but it is one of the most practical implementable tools that we have to limit the damage of these types of incident. And of course, this bill was inspired not by the recent spill in the Gulf, but rather by the Dubai Star, which spilled 400 to 800 gallons of oil into San Francisco Bay. That was an entirely preventable incident. Had there been pre-booming, the vast majority of that oil could have been contained. It didn't need to go into marinas and into sensitive ecological habitat. And so, in the wake of that incident, my staff and I took a look around, and we found that this is an area where there are some gaps in California's otherwise exemplary policies to deal with these issues. And we found that the states of Washington and New York, for example, have much stronger measures in place. Pre-booming was something that came to us from the state of Washington and Puget Sound. And under California rules right now, pre-booming is an option, but according to the U.S. Coast Guard, they've never known anyone to actually do it. So it's an option that is routinely ignored. And given the fact that we could have contained almost all of the damage from the Dubai Star, and we can contain damage from future accidents, I think it's incumbent on us to stay at that front edge, to follow the lead of Washington and New York and others who have required pre-booming. That's what this bill does. I just want to mention, Mr. Chair, that I plan to also this bill's double referred. It's going to the Natural Resources and Water, and I plan to take an amendment in that committee that will provide a little more flexibility, much like the state of Washington does. They require pre-booming except if there are conditions that make it unsafe. Right. So we intend to take that amendment, but it also provides that when one decides not to pre-boom, you have to justify it in a report to the authorities to explain why it was not safe. And I think with that change, I will welcome testimony from Jackie Dragon from Pacific Environment.
Thank you. Welcome. Witnesses in support. And we're going to ask if folks can try and limit their comments to a couple of witnesses for a couple of minutes each, please.
My name is Jackie Dragon. I appreciate this opportunity to testify on behalf of Pacific Environment and our thousands of supporters. Following the Dubai Star oil spill, which occurred during a routine refueling operation or bunkering operation on a mild weather day, I spoke with representatives from the Coast Guard, from OSPR, from Washington State, as well as oil transfer companies and oil spill response organizations responsible for deploying boom on the east and west coasts. What I learned convinced me that we are not doing enough currently to protect California waters, and that requiring pre-booming for ships transferring oil across open water is the most effective way to achieve a better outcome for these types of spills. In Washington, where pre-booming their fuel transfers is the standard, and they have been conducting detailed volume investigations of oil spills for some time now, data and experience demonstrates the efficacy of pre-booming. For example, on November 5th of last year, 6 days after the Dubai Star spill, a Navy aircraft spilled 500 gallons of jet fuel in Washington. The vessel was pre-boomed, and 100% of the fuel was contained, even as night was falling and a storm was coming in. As a result of pre-booming, the environmental damage was minimized, and cleanup was much faster and cheaper. Without pre-booming, I was told, Port Orchard would have been greased shore to shore with extensive environmental damage. Washington estimates that uncontained spills cost between $1,000 and $2,000 per spilled gallon to clean up, not including resource damages. Reasons given for not pre-booming in San Francisco Bay include the statement, boom is generally ineffective when currents exceed 0.7 to 1.2 knots of current. If the standard for boom effectiveness is 100% containment with no oil escaping through attainment, which means oil escaping under the boom, then that's a fair statement. But if you believe, as we do, that containing up to 80% of that oil spilled is a good measure of effectiveness, then pre-booming definitely provides for a better response. By not requiring pre-booming, we're relying on crew that maybe have trained or tested maybe twice in a year. In Washington, they expect pre-booming during any occurrence if it's safe to do so. We should be doing the same thing here in California if we want to protect our coasts as we do. And data from New York and other places let us know that that is effective and the best way to go about protecting from these types of spills. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Pamela Flick, and on behalf of Defenders of Wildlife and our more than 145,000 members.
You can hang on for just a second. Folks, a reminder, the acoustics in the room are absolutely wonderful, which is the good news. The bad news is that means that even quiet conversations tend to echo and disturb the testimony. I want to make sure that we hear from witnesses in support and opposition, so if you can keep your conversations to a minimum, quiet and or outside the committee hearing room, I know we'd all appreciate it. Thanks very much. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of our members and activists in California, I would like to express our strong support of AB 234. This bill will improve California's requirement for oil transfer operations across open waters to ensure for all who would benefit from oil-free coasts and waters in California that we are practicing the most effective protective measures. Approval of this measure could not be more timely. AB 234 would require pre-booming for all vessel-to-vessel transfer operations. Current regulations stop short of this level of precautionary prevention and mandate the deployment of personnel and boom equipment only in the event of a spill and only within 30 minutes of the discovery of a spill. Because pre-booming is not required, oil transfers occurring at anchor in San Francisco Bay are rarely, if ever, pre-boomed. AB 234 builds on the positive experience of Washington State, as we've heard, which mandates pre-booming as the gold standard for safe oil transfers to protect people, wildlife, and the environment. Training requirements and a mandate to have equipment readily available have significantly increased preparedness of personnel to respond to a spill. Experience and data from Washington State demonstrate 80% of oil is recovered when operations are pre-boomed or a spill is boomed immediately. If the operation is not pre-boomed or boom is not readily available for immediate deployment, then the recovery rate drops to below 10%. When oil is spilled, every minute counts, and pre- or immediate booming is the best line of defense. AB 234 will ensure that California has the equipment and trained personnel on site and at the ready to respond immediately in the event of a spill during an oil transfer operation. If we intend to protect San Francisco Bay and our rich coastal environments, we need this proven prevention measure for predictable yet risky oil transfers in open waters. We strongly support AB 234 and urge you to pass this important legislation to improve preventative measures and provide the best available protection for California's invaluable coasts, bay, beaches, wildlife, and public health. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any other witnesses in support who at this point would be asked to simply indicate their name, their organization, and their support position? Welcome.
Marcy Keever with Friends of the Earth, and we are in strong support of AB 234.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Brian Owicki, Center for Biological Diversity, in strong support.
Thank you very much.
Mark Holmes with the Bay Institute of San Francisco, in support.
Thank you.
Crystal Molenkamp on behalf of Ocean Conservancy, in support.
Thank you very much. Any other witnesses in support? Are there witnesses in opposition? Welcome. And as you're coming up, just so we know we're all talking about the same thing, Assemblymember Huffman, my understanding is that you've agreed to take amendments in the next committee, should your bill move forward from this committee, to address the concern that was raised in the analysis about the fact that under some circumstances, particularly weather, pre-booming may not be the appropriate measure. And then my understanding from your office's work with our staff is that you're also prepared to take some definitions that clarify, take some amendments that clarify definitions for oil transfer facilities. Is that correct?
Correct.
And will those also be taken in the next committee? They will. All right, thank you. Now let me say welcome. Now we all know what bill we're talking about and what's in it and what might be in it in the future. Welcome, and please present.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Julie Altman with the California Department of Fish and Game. Good afternoon, all members of the committee. The department is opposed to AB 234. We've been working with your staff. We've also been working with Assemblymember Huffman on this issue. The department has possession, I guess, of the Office of Spill Prevention and Response, and I've brought with me our OSPR administrator, Steve Ettinger, today to talk to you about this bill and let you know why we've taken the opposed position and why we believe that this is an issue that's best left in the hands of the regulatory affairs of OSPR.
All right, we're going to let you two tag team as one witness. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to testify. Once again, my name is Steve Ettinger, and I am the administrator of the Office of Spill Prevention and Response. Anytime there's a spill in California, we go back and do a review of what we can improve on spill response for California. Certainly, we work with the author of this bill and members of this committee after the Costco Busan to pass bills to strengthen oil spill response and prevention in California. After the Dubai Star spill on October 30th, we went back and looked at our regulations. Our regulations were last updated in 2002, looking at bunkering and lightering operations. At that point, and we still believe pre-booming is not the best option, that pre-booming actually can be a hindrance to safe operations. It could create a distraction for the operation. It is not necessarily the most effective means of responding to an oil spill should one occur. We did look at regulatory changes. I do have authority to pass regulations or promulgate regulations. We came up with some proposed regulations in April this year. We held public hearings, public workshops for input. Right now, we've sent those proposed regulations out for additional comment, and we expect to have formal regulatory process begin sometime this summer, later on this summer.
Let me just stop you there, because we're at 2 minutes, but here's what I'd like to do to help further discussion. We're going to go to questions now, and I'm going to start with the first one to try and focus your testimony a little bit, if I may. Mm-hmm. So your argument is that this issue ought to be addressed by the regulatory process rather than statutorily? Is that your argument?
That is correct.
Great. Could you tell us why, please?
The legislature has given me the authority to promulgate and be in charge of making regulations for oil transfer operations throughout California, and that's what we have done, and that's what we intend to continue to do.
Okay. And but let me ask I'm going to let Assemblymember Huffman get to this question a little later in his close. But so, what's the understanding that legislators like to legislate and regulators like to regulate?
Sure.
What's the downside of dealing with this issue by legislation as opposed to regulation, which I understand is part of the argument you're making? Either one of you.
Well, certainly, Senator, the first thing that comes to mind is that the regulatory process is a lot more dynamic, with all due respect, than the legislative process. Right now, what we've gotten...
been called worse, ma'am, so that's
okay. What we've got right now is this kind of blending of regulatory language and statutory language that will then be codified should the bill go into effect. What OSPR's domain is, for the most part, is under the rubric of the regulatory authority they have under the government code. They're very responsive, they're very engaging to the public and the regulated entities, and obviously so is the legislature. But at the same time, if something goes wrong in the regulatory process, or something doesn't work when we get it out in the water, we can revisit that very readily and get that off the books.
Thank you. Anything else on that question before we ask for other witnesses?
I think she handled that well.
Okay. Well, thank you. We're going to thank you for your testimony. Ask you to stick around in case there are other questions from members of the committee, and then we're going to take the next witness in opposition.
Okay.
And if you would come forward. Thank you, folks. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is John Berg, and I'm with the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. First of all, I'd like to thank the author's office for reaching out to us several times to discuss some of our concerns. Unfortunately, at this point, none of the amendments that we've seen to date have addressed those, which prompted our opposed position. I do appreciate the amendment offered by the author today in committee. That does address one of our issues. We'll wait and see how that language plays out. What's already been brought up today is the fact that boom is not a panacea, and we believe that although this is well-intentioned, it essentially puts people in harm's way for very little, if any, benefit. There are several areas in the state where weather and current conditions are not conducive to safe and effective deployment of boom. People mention the state of Washington. Just so you know, Puget Sound normally has currents that run about a half a knot or less in the traditional fueling areas, which is Seattle, Tacoma, Port Angeles. In San Francisco Bay, we did a quick study. Currents run over 1 knot for approximately 65 to 70% of the tidal cycles during the year. Now, in Washington State, they actually don't deploy boom in current over 1/2 to 1 knot, as well as taking some wind and sea conditions into consideration. So again, this is not going to be a cure-all that people, I think, are anticipating. We do support the efforts that OSPR is doing in terms of regulatory reform, and we hope that and we also feel that is the appropriate venue for dealing with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we may have questions, so if you can stay with us, that'd be helpful. Sure. Next witness.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Tony Francois for the Western States Petroleum Association. We have not taken a position on the bill. We want to echo the appreciation for Assemblymember Huffman and his staff for the opportunity to discuss some of the technical issues that we've raised some concerns with his office about. The chief of those being the issue of booming and tidal conditions, and we'll look forward to seeing the amendments on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we are at the name, organization, and position point in our testimony at this point. If we could ask folks to simply weigh in that way, please. Welcome.
Is it me? Am I ready?
Yes.
Are we ready? Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lee Sandahl. I am with the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, and I'm here representing our affiliate union, the Inland Boatmen's Union, which does the crew work on the barges and also on the tugs.
And, sir, if I could just ask you to give us your support or opposed position, because we have had 2 witnesses who...
Actually, my position is neutral at this point, and I wanted to tell the committee that I have spoken with the author's office. And, of course, my concerns are safety for our people that are working on these, on the barges and on the tugs, and that we will look forward to his amendments, and then we will proceed from there.
Thank you very much. Any other witnesses? Support, oppose, or in between?
Mr. Chair and members, Tim Schott on behalf of the California Association of Port Authorities, and we're in between. We apologize for not working with the author's office to date. We've been behind the curve. We do not have an official position on the bill. Just want to be concerned with and aware of the potential impact, particularly to the upland river ports of Sacramento, West Sacramento and Stockton, where the Anchorage No. 9 in San Francisco Bay is critical to facilitating trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we could go back to the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association before we get to the author. Your testimony was helpful. Thank you, because the issue I was struggling with was the booming equipment is already on the vessel, if I understand it correctly. Yes or no?
The booming equipment is actually on the fuel transfer unit, which would be the tug and barge, yes, okay. Not on the ship itself.
All right, but there's no special requirement to load equipment which doesn't already exist, was the issue I was trying to get to.
In terms of having that equipment on board, the length of boom has been adjusted slightly in the language of the bill, which I think I can't speak for the tug and barge people, but they might have some issues there. Right. But the difference would be whether they actually are deploying it on a regular basis or not.
But your primary concern is essentially putting people in harm's way, since the people are already there and the booming equipment is already there. So it's really a question about whether or not there's value added and whether or not there's safety concerns. If that's an inaccurate assessment on my part, please feel free to correct me, because it's your words, not mine.
That's more or less one of our major concerns, the ability to take fuel in adverse weather conditions that might be proven unsafe and ineffective.
Right. Thank you. Why don't we go to Assemblymember Huffman, and then to respond to that particular issue, since that's come up a couple times, and then see if there are other questions from committee members.
Thank you, Senator. Well, once again, we are taking an amendment to conform this to the Washington rules, which do provide that if the conditions are unsafe, you don't have to pre-deploy the boom. You do have to write up why it was too unsafe to do it, though. Because I think we've seen in recent years that simply having booming be an option instead of a presumption has resulted in no one ever doing it. And we want that to change. With respect to the effectiveness of the boom, though, the data we've seen suggests that they boom quite successfully in 1 to 3 knots in Puget Sound. And so we have reviewed PMSA's opposition materials. We're going to keep working with them, but there are lots of times on San Francisco Bay when the conditions would allow effective pre-booming. And of course, the postmortem from the Dubai Star tells us that had that been done, the vast majority of the oil could have been contained and recaptured. So this is worth doing. And with respect to the Department of Fish and Game and OSPR's position about leaving this to the regs, I think we have a disagreement, frankly, as to whether pre-booming should continue to be an option or whether it should just be required as the presumptive practice unless justified otherwise. And unfortunately, the draft regs continue this view that there's an easy way to avoid pre-booming. If you simply demonstrate in a periodic drill to the department that you're capable of deploying, that's good enough. Then we go right back to the status quo where nobody ever does it.
Thank you. Questions from members of the committee? Senator Runner.
Quick question in regard to the current issue, and I assume then you're taking an amendment in the next committee that you said was be consistent with what the Washington law is?
Correct, Senator.
And at least the Washington law was described here as the pre-booming would not take place if the currents were above a half a knot to 1 knot or something. Is that close? It's not in the law.
That's not in the law in Washington, no. I don't want to speak for the witness.
What is the law in Washington? Sir, I'm asking.
The law is what the law will be if my bill passes here, which is that you're going to pre-boom unless you can justify that the conditions are unsafe.
Okay, that's not my question. My question is, what is the law in Washington? Because you said
that is the law in Washington.
Is that the law in Washington from your testimony?
Yes, Senator. Well, essentially, yes. But what they have done subsequently to that through regulation is that they've developed approved pre-booming plans in the state of Washington for the fuel transfer units. And within that, they specify what are the thresholds for when you should be booming and when you don't have to boom.
Okay.
And this is the pre-booming plan from the one fuel transfer company that operates in Puget Sound, and their upper limit threshold is 2 to 3 feet for sea state value, a half to 1 knot for current.
Actually, that's fine. I don't need to know. Let me go back to the author. Are you adopting then the law or their regulations that they actually operate with that you're going to put into your bill?
Well, I don't know that the practice in Washington has been accurately represented here today. Our understanding, there's been a report that we've...
Well, here's my frustration. My frustration is we're debating an amendment that doesn't exist yet. And so I don't know what your amendment's really going to do. And so I guess that's, I guess we can talk about what the law is or isn't, but I still don't know what your amendment truly
I can tell you exactly what my amendment will do. My amendment will say that pre-booming is the requirement unless it's unsafe, and we will require a report that covers several different categories of conditions whenever pre-booming is not deployed to demonstrate, so that OSPR and others can know that there's a good faith effort to do pre-booming wherever it's safe.
And in this amendment, we'll list out those? Okay, so we still don't know what those are yet.
Currents, wind, vessel traffic, fishing activities in the area. There's a handful of others, but those are some of the ones that jump to mind.
Just a question. Why don't we have these amendments before us here?
Bill is double referred. The author has been trying to respond on a timely basis. As you heard, some folks have gotten to him more recently than others who got to him earlier. And because the bill is double referred, the question is, are we prepared to move it forward to Natural Resources with the understanding that the amendments would be prepared for that?
I have a quick question for Fish and Game, if they can make their way up.
And since they told us that they were nimble and flexible, and that's why we should let them do it, I'm sure they can make their way up.
In your conversations, then, as you've heard about the amendments that are going to take place, does that satisfy your ability to safely determine when the pre-booming is necessary or not necessary? What's your thought in regards to that?
I think the devil will be in the details. You know, some of the concerns that we've had certainly.
It's in the amendment that we don't have before us.
And that would be the details.
Okay.
Certainly, boom does fail at a fairly low knot current, and that's what our concern is: the ability to deploy and safely deploy and have effective strategy for dealing with an oil spill or, in this case, a bunkering spill. If
the amendments were such, or as the bill stands right now, let me just ask that because it's not amended before us right now. Could the statute that requires pre-booming make could it indeed make a spill more dangerous in regards to the challenges of cleanup than what the current regulation is?
The bill that's in front of us that we're talking about right now has the requirement to pre-boom, and what we've felt, and also dealing with State Lands Commission, who deals with the same issue, it could detract from a safe operation. The idea that you're putting boom out at a high current area.
Okay. So the language itself, you believe, would make it less safe than what the current regulation is?
That's our position, and it has been our position.
The potential could be that future amendments may not make it so, but we do not have those amendments before us.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Are there other questions from other members of the committee? Senator Lowenthal.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. Right now, when we do not require pre-booming, and now, what options do we have? Let's say we do not pass this. When they're doing an oil transfer, what do we do? We know that there's a potential danger. Is it because of the cost that we... What is the issue of doing this?
The issue has always been whether or not it's safe to conduct the booming operation. In other words, does the booming do what it's supposed to do, and will it detract or will it make the entire operation safe?
And what you're saying is, if we don't do, and there is an oil spill, there is something else that we have in its place?
In regulation, the transfer company is required to deploy within 30 minutes of a notification of a spill 600 feet. In addition, they're required to put another 600 feet within the next 30 minutes. So 1,200 feet of boom within the first hour of the spill is what's required in regulation.
So they would have to do this right now. And doing this, is it such an onerous thing to do it beforehand?
In some areas, for instance, in your district,
right.
There actually is pre-booming that does go on. There was one spill in 2008 that we know of that was pre-boomed.
So they do pre-boom.
In areas of low current, it's not a big thing to put out boom ahead of time. In areas like in Anchorage 9, where you have currents sometimes approaching 6 knots.
But he's already agreed to amendments that deal with that issue.
And I think we would look at our position on the bill once we see those amendments, but we haven't seen those.
Okay, so what you're saying is with those amendments, you potentially could be removing your opposition.
I think we would evaluate our position.
Any other questions, members? Okay. I think we've had testimony. Please close.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to make a quick point in closing, and that is that boom is the only physical tool we have to contain and capture oil. There is no alternative. And so we need to be sure that we are deploying it aggressively and effectively wherever possible. Having it on hand so that conceptually it might be deployed within 30 minutes of a spill is not good enough if you remember that oil can move 1 mile in 1 hour in 1 knot of current. So this would position California, I think, appropriately with the state of Washington, with the state of New York at the front edge of protected policies to make sure that we don't suffer the kind of economic and ecological damage from an oil spill that we've seen elsewhere, especially from spills that can be prevented with this kind of a physical tool. And with that, I will respectfully request your aye vote.
I'd be glad to move the bill. We'll be looking at the amendments in natural resources tomorrow.
Simidian? Runner? No. Runner, no. Corbett? Hancock? Lowenthal?
Aye.
Lowenthal, aye. Pavley?
Aye.
Pavley, aye. Strickland?
No.
Strickland, no. 2 yes, 2 no.
Thank you, Senator.
Go to AB 1674.
Good afternoon. This bill will allow for changes in inspections of underground storage tanks. Is this working? Yeah. Okay. And I'll start by accepting recommended amendments that were outlined in comment 5 in the analysis. I'll accept those as authors' amendments. This bill will make it easier for local agencies who regulate inspections of underground fuel storage tanks to exempt vaulted tanks from the unfeasible requirements of a buried style of tank. It clarifies there are distinctions between those that can be visually inspected and those that are completely buried underground and require more specialized types of monitoring, and also allows local agencies to inspect above-ground storage tanks that are on federal lands, as they have done with other types of privately owned or commercially operated underground storage tanks. By adding above-ground storage tanks to these inspections, we seek to prevent spills such as those that have occurred in San Diego in the past and cost the Navy considerable amount of money to clean up. The bill does have industry support, and I have some witnesses here in support.
Mr. Chairman, members, Justin Malone on behalf of the local environmental health directors. We have the Cooper programs in environmental health. This is largely a technical bill, but it's a good government's bill. It's eliminating something that's basically infeasible to implement at the local level, and we urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Jonathan Clay on behalf of the County of San Diego in support of the measure. We're primarily concerned with the provision of the bill dealing with the above-ground storage tanks and regulation at federal facilities. This is a technical change. We've worked with the Department of Defense last fall on developing this language and believe that there's no opposition to that provision of the bill.
The testimony and support of add-on. Name and organization.
Thank you. Bob Lucas, representing California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance, but I do have some other information for you that I hope you would be interested in. CEEP has been working this year to try to come up with a set of amendments to this bill that would address a category of tanks that unfortunately are below grade, but they are above ground. They are not buried and they're not underground tanks. We're working with the Water Board staff. We understand that the condition of being added to this bill is that everyone agree to this. We're well aware of that, and we're working towards that.
What is that on the bill now?
We couldn't get it
You're in support of the bill
today.
now.
We're in support of the bill today, but I needed to put you on notice that we are still working on this amendment, and at some point we hope to be able to bring it forward and work with the staff.
Where does this bill go after this?
I'm sorry?
Is the bill double probes?
Right, it is not going to another policy.
So which committee would you think we
Well, we wouldn't do anything in any committee without bringing it back and talking to the chair and to the staff of the committee. It would be our intention, if our next opportunity is appropriations, to use that opportunity to amend the bill, okay. but with everybody in agreement.
So the author open to another amendment?
We've been working with the gentleman, and if this would strengthen the bill and close some other loopholes, that's a potential. But at this point, we are not.
You're in your last policy committee?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Other testimony in support? Testimony in opposition? Would you like to close?
Well, I think that this will streamline the process and protect us from overly burdensome regulations, and ask for your aye vote.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I'd be glad to move the bill.
There you go. And there's a motion.
Yes.
Please call the roll.
Simonian, Runner.
Aye.
Runner, aye. Corbett, Hancock, Lowenthal, Pavley.
Aye.
Pavley, aye. Strickland.
Aye.
Strickland, aye. 3 yes.
You have 3 votes.
Very good. Thank you.
Others will be coming soon. Assembly member, Monty.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is AB 1824.
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members,
AB 1824 prohibits the use and sale of 6 chemicals commonly found in recreational vehicle or RV toilet additives and allows the Department of Toxic Substance Control to adopt regulations when it identifies additional chemicals that could undermine a sewage disposal system. In 1977, the legislature enacted a law banning non-biodegradable toxic chemicals in RV toilet additives. Regulations list 19 specific chemicals that are prohibited currently from use in RV toilet additives. In the past 30 years, the department has not taken steps to update these regulations, nor do they feel they have explicit authority to do so. Many RV park septic systems operate using natural bioorganisms to treat and break down sewage. However, there are some toxic chemicals used in many common RV toilet additives that kill the natural bioorganisms and cause septic systems to fail, and in turn cause sewage to seep into surrounding soil and groundwater. RV park owners are attempting to educate their customers about alternative toilet additives. However, until a vast majority of RV owners learn how to use alternative additives, or until the state prohibits the use of certain chemical products, it is unfair and ineffective to require the RV park owners to enforce the use of biodegradable toilet additives. A majority of RV park owners are mom-and-pop operations who cannot afford to repair or replace damaged septic systems. For almost 5 years, discussions have taken place with regulatory agencies and RV park owners on a solution to address RV toilet additives that contain harmful chemicals. Having exhausted regulatory remedies, a legislative solution is now needed. AB 1824 furthers a public policy established by the legislature when it was determined that certain chemicals should not be used in RV toilet additives. The measure will benefit hundreds of small businesses throughout the state of California, potentially saving them tens of thousands of dollars that would otherwise be spent on repairing or replacing their park septic systems. Now you are going to hear eventually from 2 opponents, each of whom work for out-of-state manufacturers and argue that these products are fine and shouldn't be banned. My office and the sponsors are talking with these individuals to get a third-party entity to agree with the information that Dometic has put forward. These companies also produce the green products, and that have not affected adversely the economics of these companies. And Mr. Chair, my office is committed to continuing to work with committee staff as AB 1824 proceeds. But today I have here to testify, with your permission, Mr. Trent Smith, representing the California Association of RV and Campground Parks. Thank you.
All right. Welcome. Witnesses in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Trent Smith on behalf of the California Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds, which are privately owned campgrounds in California, approximately 400 members in every corner of the state. As Mr. Monning outlined for you, this bill has been 4.5 years in the making. We did not rush to the legislature looking for a legislative solution. We have been in discussions again for 4.5 years with the various regulatory agencies looking for a solution to the problem which has stricken RV parks throughout California, and that is that their septic systems are failing. In one particular case in Southern California, one of those regulatory agencies actually cited approximately 26 parks and told them immediately to prohibit RVers from hooking up to their systems, and they identified the toilet additives and particularly formaldehyde as one of the causes for the failing systems. We have relied on the Department of Toxic Substance Control for technical advice on this bill. They are not supporting or opposing, but we have relied on them for technical advice. We're also relying on US EPA notifications, the Department or University of Arizona and University of Cornell, and again the other regulatory agency that tried to shut our campgrounds down as the basis for the chemicals outlined in this bill. Again, we are attempting this bill for the livelihood not just of the small businesses throughout the state, but for the groundwater issues that are associated with failing systems. We are also cognizant of the economic issues of the manufacturers. However, the manufacturers are also producing green products, ones that use bioorganisms, and and in many cases touting the production and use of those products as environmentally sensitive and good for the consumer. So we believe that is a key issue. If the chemical-based products were not a threat, then why would you be manufacturing the green products? Also, in addition, not here right now because I think they just had to leave, the California Tourism Industry Association, which is comprised of the lodging industry, parks, and whatnot, including the Chamber of Commerce, is also supporting the bill, and we hope you will support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other witnesses in support? If so, would you come forward, please? One more witness for a couple of minutes at most, and then if folks could just add their Me Too's, please. In support?
Bill McGavin with Sierra Club, California. We support this bill as a way to provide some protection for our groundwater against these toxic chemicals.
Thank you.
Justin Malone for the local environmental health directors. The local environmental health folks permit these facilities, and we've noticed a very disturbing increase in
Thank you.
Lori Chen on behalf of Clean Water Action in support.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition, if you'd like to come forward. And again, if we can ask you to try and limit your remarks to a couple of minutes and with a couple of witnesses, and then others just add their Me Too's if possible, please. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman and members, Ralph Simone representing the Recreational Vehicle Industry Association. We find ourselves in a somewhat awkward position of opposing our historical partners, the RV park and campground people. We certainly empathize with the problem. However, the problem has not been totally identified in a scientific manner. The proponents mentioned that there were 29 incidents of citation. We agree with that, but we have not seen one State Water Resources Control Board citation that identified any of those specific chemicals. So we empathize with the problem, would like to work with them. The bill itself is a fundamental shift from where we are today, which is a performance-based standard on on biodegradability. This bill would shift it from that standard based upon science to something whereby fiat 6 chemicals would be listed as prohibited from further use. In fact, DTSC in February of 2009 actually had an advisory that was out in the public saying these should not be used. When they were challenged on the underlying sciences to that advisory, they actually withdrew the advisory. So I'd like to turn it over to two folks that have a knowledge of the science for some brief comments. Mary Burrows from Thetford Corporation and Ed McKiernan from Dometic. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Mary Burrows. I am the manager of chemical development at Thetford Corporation. Thetford produces both traditional toilet deodorizers that would be precluded from sale in California by AB 1824, as well as alternative green toilet deodorizers. Unfortunately, the alternative products do not work as effectively at temperatures exceeding 80 degrees and could have adverse unintended consequences on consumer behavior. As a scientist, I've read dozens of independent scientific studies and engineering reports on the subject of treating holding tank waste. And the results of these studies are clear. Properly sized and operated waste treatment systems successfully treat the high-strength holding tank waste and the deodorants they contain. Over and over again, these studies and engineering reports conclude the most important aspect to consider is to size the system for the high-strength waste. I've had hands-on experience with various treatment systems thought to have problems caused by treating holding tank deodorants. In each case, the scientific data confirmed the real problem was not the chemicals in the deodorants, but the high concentration of waste being disposed of in an undersized system. In a recent conference call, the California State Water Resource Control Board stated they have cited septic systems out of compliance with permits, but have not made determinations that toilet deodorizers are the cause for the failure. They also have not found any of these 6 chemicals prohibited from sale in California pursuant to AB 1824 in the groundwater under their groundwater monitoring program. They state campgrounds are still subject to citations for out of compliance even if this bill passes. Absent scientific data about the cause of septic tank failures, AB 1824 will not fix treatment systems that are not designed or operated properly. I feel it is extremely important to know the true cause of these failures before passing a bill that will not solve this problem and might even make it worse, because consumers will concoct their own home remedy solution that will further compromise septic systems. Therefore, I request that the committee not pass AB 1824 until there is a thorough scientific evaluation as to the impacts of toilet deodorizers and septic tanks. Thetford Corporation is committed to assisting this scientific evaluation.
Right, thank you. Sir, we're at the time limit, but I'm going to just sort of stretch that just a little bit, but I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath, think about what your topic sentence is, the thing you most want to be sure that this committee knows. Start with that, and then just take maybe 30, 40 seconds at the most to try and do it. We're past the time. Thank you.
I'm Ed McKiernan. I'm Director of Product Development for Sanitation Products for Dometic Corporation. All chemicals have risk, even green chemicals. When we look for the science behind the six chemicals listed in AB 1824, we find none. The list of 6 chemicals was adapted from a California Department of Toxic Substances Control fact sheet and copied directly into the bill. The DTSC fact sheet is a direct copy of the University of Arizona Public Information Bulletin, originally published in 2000. The DTSC and the State Water Resources Board have produced no evidence of actual testing of the listed chemicals. As a point of clarification,
and this will be your last point, please.
Fine. Dr. Farrell Poe of the University of Arizona, the author of the original public information bulletin on these chemicals, has indicated that her list of 6 chemicals was not intended to support an outright statutory prohibition against their concern.
Thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
All right. We have had testimony in support. We've had testimony in opposition. We have a question or comment from Senator Runner.
Real quick, the testimony that you had just given, you had talked about the idea of on a let's see, how'd you phrase that? On a septic system that is fully developed or meets the criteria for the size or use, I would suppose, is what the idea, that there is no evidence in regards to a problem in regards to the use of the chemical in the system itself, right?
Yes, that's correct.
I guess the challenge that we have in many of these places is that I would assume that many of these recreational facilities may not have the optimum size tank.
I think you're probably right.
And so therefore, if they don't have the optimum size tank, then am I to lead from your testimony that it could create a problem in their septic system?
To use these deodorants?
Yes.
The deodorants are probably already in use because there's a variety of deodorants in use today, including the green alternatives and some of the 6 that are listed in the bill. The problem is if it's not sized properly for treating the high-strength waste, for all of these RVers emptying on Monday, Memorial Day weekend, eliminating those chemicals isn't going to fix that. They're still going to have problems. And this has been shown over and over with the scientific studies that have been done.
And that these particular items, chemicals, do not create a greater problem?
They are not the sole problem. They are not.
What my question was.
It's not the major problem. The major problem is that these systems are undersized and not maintained properly, most likely,
Again,
based on other studies.
Here's the hurdle I'm trying to get over, and that is that's probably all true. But meanwhile, you got some folks that have owned these facilities, and it's not like they can go out and put together a whole new, and a big septic facility would cost, goodness, $250,000. So it's not like they can go out there and do the whole new system. And so they're trying to be as careful as they can with the existing system that they have.
And studies show that converting everybody over to enzyme or biological-based products is not going to solve that problem. If it's undersized or not maintained properly, switching everybody over to enzymes isn't going to solve it. And actually, there's an EPA report that shows that enzymes can be detrimental to a septic system because it carries the solids into the drain field.
Okay. Back to the author and the sponsor. The hurdle I have with the bill is actually that it comes down to 6 specific chemicals. Tell me a little bit about what your frustration has been and why we have not addressed this through the regulatory process successfully.
Start.
Certainly, Senator. We, again, 4.5 years ago, as systems were beginning to fail and people, park owners, were hiring independent consultants to come in and say, hey, why is my system failing and what can I do to fix it? It was the consultants that they hired who were identifying the toilet additives for them. We then went to the Water Resources Control Board, the Department of Toxic Substance Control, and asked them for assistance, and basically got bounced back and forth for about 4.5 years, saying, well, it's more appropriately their jurisdiction. They also pointed to the 1979 law that tried to address this issue, but of course hasn't been updated or anything done since 1979. We asked them to do something, and they were either unwilling or unable. And so finally, after 4.5 years, we came to the legislature. And again, where we got the particular chemicals, as I outlined, there were various university studies, U.S. EPA notification, and other documents that we used. Finally, the department, as was indicated, of Toxic Substance Control, put out an advisory, listed the 6 chemicals, and as you heard from the witnesses, they did pull that off when they got challenged by one of the manufacturers seated here, arguing that it technically was biodegradable. And the department felt that there was a gray enough area with regards to biodegradable characteristics of the chemical, but they certainly are familiar with what we're doing here and haven't voiced concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Are there additional questions? We're going to get back to the author for a close shortly, but if there are other questions from members of the committee, if not, then what I would do is go back to the author, let him respond to any of the issues that he thinks merit a response, and then we'll see if there's a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senators. And maybe to pick up on one of Senator Runner's question, on his question, we have documentation from the California Regional Water Quality Control Board citing an excessive amount of total nitrogen in the septic tank wastewater is normally due to the discharge of RV holding tank deodorizers containing formaldehyde and other hazardous chemicals. And as Trent mentioned, the Department of Toxic Substances Control has also identified that they don't believe AB 1824 runs afoul of the green chemistry program. Rather, it modifies an existing program. So the existing program identified the first group of chemicals. This would seek to supplement that with the 6 that we've identified. And if I could just comment, Mr. Chair, very briefly, the testimony of Ms. Burrows in her first comment indicated that the environmentally compatible products aren't as effective, and yet on their website they state when they were cited for their eco-friendly products, they said we were able to create formulations according to the EPA's requirements without sacrificing performance. So something doesn't ring consistent in terms of saying they're not as effective, but on their website to say that they don't sacrifice performance. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Chair and members, that there are good alternatives. This bill seeks to protect mom-and-pop RV park owners that populate, there's over 400 of these businesses in the state of California, and to protect groundwater. The expenses, this is a preventive measure. If we don't implement this prevention, owners and communities will be paying the cost of cleanup. So if there are no further questions, Mr. Chair, I thank you for this opportunity to present today and respectfully request an aye vote.
Thank you for your close. Is there a motion on the bill, members?
I'd be glad to move the bill for a couple of reasons. One, there's toxic-free alternatives, and replacement of a septic system with someone who represents the Malibu area can be very expensive. And if there is a transitional and short-term solution to reducing the risk of contaminants getting into lakes, streams, rivers, or underground water sources, I think this is a move in the right direction. And for the fact for the fact that the Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds came forward and requesting the legislature to do this, I think is something we should be supporting.
All right. Motion by Pavley. Call the roll.
Semidion.
Aye.
Semidion, aye. Runner. Corbett.
Aye.
Corbett, aye. Hancock.
Aye.
Hancock, aye. Lowenthal. Pavley.
Aye.
Pavley, aye. Strickland.
Aye.
Strickland, aye. 5 yes.
We have 5-0. You have sufficient votes, but we're going to hold the roll open so that absent members may add on if they wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
All right. Assemblymember Niello, thank you very much for your patience, sir. Members, we are taking up item number 7 on our agenda. This is AB 2328. And Assemblymember, I'm going to ask you one very important question before you begin. And that would be, would you please pronounce your name the way you like to hear it pronounced?
Nilo.
Thank you. That was.
I've got to tell my brother to start advertising some more.
Thank you very much. I've heard my name and your name pronounced a half dozen different ways each, and I thought I would just ask you and see if we couldn't begin to develop some consistency.
In the mother country, they say Niello, but it lost a bit in the translation, and we don't fight it.
Well, then, in that case, Assemblymember Niello, if you will present, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. AB 2328 is really, I think, an equity measure more than anything else. The Air Resources Board has 11 members, and currently there are members that are designated to come from air quality management districts to represent certain scientific expertise. There's a couple of public members, and all of those deal with the air quality, but not from the vantage point of those most directly affected by the measures that they impose. Certainly, the public does, and their public members, but much of the effect of regulations affect the business community, and disproportionately the small business community, because they are the least prepared, frankly, to figure out how to navigate the impacts of regulations just because they have smaller staffs and smaller size of scale, if you will. So AB 2328 seeks to make sure that that voice exists when the Air Resources Board is deliberating regulations that they will promulgate and then impose. And to make sure that that voice is heard, AB 2328 would specify that one seat on that board be reserved for a small business person. Now, I know that there's a couple of members on the board now that appear to be small business people, but that's not why they're there. And so that designation, I think, is extremely important. That's simply what the bill does. And I have Michael Shaw from the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the sponsor of the bill, with me to testify in support. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you very much. Witnesses in support. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Michael Shaw with the National Federation of Independent Business. Very happy to bring this support to Member Niello, a fellow small business owner, in bringing this bill forward. The potential impact of the regulations passed by the Air Resources Board are significant for small business. And the significance of small business to California's economic vitality and health is undeniable. More than 98% of businesses in the state are considered small businesses. Approximately 52% of private sector employment is in a small business. And about 14 times, relative to patents or innovation, 14 times more patents are held by small businesses than are large businesses on a per employee basis. So critically, small business plays a major role in the state, and as such, its importance to California is undeniable. We believe that by placing or by requiring that the criteria for one of the members of the Air Resources Board be a small business owner is one easy way of recognizing that impact and ensuring that the decisions made by the board have the input and essentially the decision-making authority of one of those small business representatives. The amendments that were suggested by the committee would amend that slightly to say that they have been a small business owner in the past. This obviously helps address some of the situations where a business owner may deem that the time demanded by the board is more than they can dedicate to that, as well as taking on the conditions of their business. So we believe that that helps address that issue, but while ensuring that someone in that seat has an understanding of what these regulations mean for the business and mean for small business in general. Right. So we appreciate your consideration today and ask for your aye vote.
Thank you very much. Do we have witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition, please.
Mr. Chairman and members, Bill McGavin with Sierra Club, California. This bill is a solution in search of a problem. The Air Board is not lacking for representation by small business owners and hasn't been for a very long time. And to set aside a seat specifically is to unnecessarily restrict the ability of the governor to pick the best person for the job. In addition, if you earmark a seat for a particular constituency, then why would you stop here? Why would you give representation to the owners of small businesses and not the workers who work for those businesses? Why not give a particular seat to members of community groups who come from the communities that have the worst air pollution in the state? Rather than going down that road, it's best to refrain from statutorily earmarking particular seats for particular constituencies.
Further testimony in opposition? All right. All right. Debate or discussion? Senator Runner.
Quick question. Many of those seats are already identified, aren't they, by certain kinds of groups?
There's several members specified, several seats specified for air quality management districts. There are seats specified, 5 from specified local air pollution control districts, 1 with training and expertise in automotive engineering, 1 similarly in the in a scientific
that's good.
field.
And my point, I was just hearing the testimony previously, is like, let's not have any requirements. Let's just go ahead and let the governor appoint whoever he'd like. But the fact is, there's already restraints in regards to doing who you get appointed. This just carves out one specific seat, or the seat then for somebody who has small business experience.
Right, and he specifically talked about constituencies, and of course, there's a couple of public members, and that's certainly a constituency, broad nonetheless, but this seeks to provide a voice from a constituency that ends up really receiving the disproportionate impact.
Thank you. Assemblymember members, here's my take, and I want to go to the 3 amendments that were recommended, which I understand the author is willing to take, if I understand correctly. It seems to me that, Assemblymember Nilo, your argument is that on an 11-member board that it would be beneficial to have someone who had a particular kind of experience among those 11 people. I am persuaded by that argument. I am persuaded in part because you have not drafted the bill so that this person is, quote, a small business representative, but rather you have indicated that the person will simply have a set of experiences which would be useful to the board. And I think that's an important distinction in terms of the way the bill is drafted, and it's helpful to me in getting to yes on the bill. The staff has recommended in the analysis 3 amendments. 1 you referenced, which was that it could also apply to someone who has been a small business owner. That expands the pool, ensures the knowledge base that you're looking for, and as was indicated, might help us avoid a potential conflict of interest. The other 2 potential amendments are to indicate that the language would be clarified to, I'm looking at comment 3 on page 4, members, that the clarification would also be needed to ensure that the board member meeting the small business requirement reflects the additional specified qualification requirements under current law. And I think that's an important clarification, because what it means is we aren't bumping somebody else who already meets one of those established criteria. We're saying that among those 11, with the established criteria and qualifications, we enhance the experience range on the board by having someone who has this additional experience as a matter of certainty. And then finally, there's an indication that a sunset might be appropriate to sort of see if the concerns that have been articulated by opponents are real, or if not, over some period of years, whether or not everybody can get comfortable with the notion. I think a realistic sunset, typically we look at 3 years, but it seems to me that if it takes a year to get somebody appointed and a year for them to serve, and then it's time to start talking about another bill again, that may be a little bit too much of a rush. So the chair would suggest 5 years if that's amenable to the author. So with those 3 amendments, Assemblymember, the chair at least would be prepared to be an aye vote on the bill. Are those 3 acceptable as author's amendments to you?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. Senator Corbett.
Thank you. I resembled that remark
yes,
at one
time.
As well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get my head around what this would actually mean. So when the appointments are being made by the governor, if he were to appoint someone who filled the automotive engineering requirement, or I guess you could be a scientist and own a small business. So he was filling the positions with someone that fit one of those categories, and they happened to have owned a small business at one time, or had a small business, or had small business experience. Would that fit the criteria of this new legislation? In other words, appointments that are being made to fulfill other requirements, that one of those appointees could fit the criteria that you're looking for, right?
Yes, it could, and I think the chair articulated well what the bill seeks to accomplish, and that is to have a voice at the table that understands the ramifications and impacts of potential regulations insofar as how it affects, in particular, small businesses. Certainly, those individuals could meet that qualification, but the important thing is that voice be there.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, you had a scientist and you had somebody who's involved in engineering, and a meteorologist and a physician. You wouldn't have to then have, and one or more of those had filled your criteria for small business. You wouldn't have to then add another small business representative.
That's possible, but obviously the details of that would have to be worked out in the governor's choice of appointments.
But it's flexible enough that a person could fulfill several criteria within the meaning of your bill.
As long as that person meets the definition of a small business as is indicated in the legislation.
Okay. Thank you. And it doesn't expand in any way the number of members?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Are there other comments or questions from members?
I do have some questions.
Senator Heinkock.
Because it does seem to me that the governor does now have the option, when making appointments, to take a wide variety of experience into account, including being a small business owner, a large business owner, definitely labor, who have a great economic interest in the way the ARB makes its decisions, and certainly some of the community advocacy groups that have worked very, very hard to clean up the air in some of our most polluted areas. The environmental justice community, however, does have an advisory committee. I'm assuming that if there is no small business or business advisory committee, that might be something the Air Board would want to set up. But I do feel that unless there are earmarked slots for everyone who has an economic interest in the outcome, it's unfair to signal to pull out any particular group. And I do know, from having served on an air quality management district board myself, the one in the Bay Area, that we are mostly elected officials, so we're kind of public interest general people anyway, but there might be some small business owners that the governor could pick when choosing. So this does seem to me to be signaling out one group and not raising the whole issue of, do we want to change the way the Air Board is appointed in California? So I could not support the bill today.
All right, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from members of the committee?
Can I just ask one more question? How are we defining small business in your definition?
It's 100 or less.
As it is defined in code.
Currently in statute.
There's a specific reference.
Yes, Senator Corbett, with regard to the definition of small business, it's defined. The definition is consistent with the definition the state uses with regard to procurement law, which is 100 employees or fewer and 10 million or less in revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Gross revenue, that is.
Any close?
Yes, just quickly with regard to Senator Hancock's concerns, there's specified membership for people that have a certain background and a certain expertise that is relevant to the development of regulations. And I think the chair expressed it well, that what we're looking for is relevant experience and expertise with regard to the knowledge and experience in operating a small business to provide that input in the discussion of regulations is something that is not necessarily missing now, but I would take exception to the witness in opposition that it's a solution in search of a problem. If it is a valuable voice and a valuable expertise in the consideration of regulations, then we should seek to make sure that that representation is there, and we otherwise do not make sure. So I think this makes that point and would provide for a much better deliberation process and regulatory development process. I ask for an aye vote.
Do we have a motion? We have a motion by Senator Runner. Call the roll.
Simidian?
Aye.
Simidian.
As amended, by the way.
Yeah, as amended.
Simidian, aye. Runner? Aye. Runner, aye. Corbett? Aye. Corbett, aye. Hancock?
No.
Hancock, no. Lowenthal? Pavley? Strickland? Aye. Strickland, aye. 4-1.
You have sufficient votes, but we're going to hold the roll open so that absent members may add on if they wish. Thank you very much, Assemblymember Nilo.
Thank you very much, Senator Simidian.
Well done. All right, that brings us to Assemblymember Fuhrer. This is AB 2379. Assemblymember Fuhrer. Our notes indicate there is no opposition on file.
No, this is a very simple bill, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee is well aware of our efforts in which the chair has been continuing to be deeply involved on green chemistry. This bill simply empowers DTSC's existing pollution prevention program to aid in that transition by expanding from 2 to 4 the number of companies to be affected and helped, and assuring at least one of those companies is a company, assuring at least one of those industries is an industry in which green chemistry is likely to be very substantially involved. No opposition, consent in the Assembly, urge an aye vote.
Do we have any witnesses in support? Do we have any witnesses in opposition? Do we have any comments or questions from the committee? Do we have a motion from the committee? Thank you. We have a motion from, I'm going to guess that you're going to pass on a close, Assemblymember Fuhrer?
Indeed.
And we'll go straight to motion by Hancock. Call the roll.
Simidian?
Aye.
Simidian, aye. Runner?
Aye.
Runner, aye. Corbett? Aye. Corbett, aye. Hancock?
Aye.
Hancock, aye. Lowenthal? Pavley? Strickland? Aye. Strickland, aye. 5 yes.
Ayes 5, noes 0. You have sufficient votes, but we'll hold the roll open in case there are members who wish to add on. Thank you very much. And that brings us to Assemblymember Chesbro as our last item. And could we ask the sergeants to call and let him know that the committee is awaiting his presence. While we're waiting, why don't we see if we can ask Senator Lowenthal to join us as well, and so that we can lift the roll. We'll go ahead and lift the roll now, though, so the members who are here can add on where they wish. And if the clerk is, that's right, if the clerk is ready, we'll march through the roll while we're waiting for one other presenter and for one other member to join us. Agenda item 1, AB 234. This is the Huffman measure. Current vote is 2-2.
Correct.
Chair not voting by virtue of absence, and we'll ask you to call the absent members.
Simitian?
Aye.
Simitian, aye. Corbett? Aye. Corbett, aye. Hancock? Hancock, aye. That's 5-2.
5-2, that bill is out. Agenda item number 2, AB 1507 by Assemblymember Liu. Current vote is 5-0. Chair voting aye. Vice Chair?
Runner? Strickland? Aye. Strickland, aye.
Call the absent members.
Runner? Runner, aye. 7-0.
7-0, that bill is out. File item 3, AB 1674. This is by Assemblymember Saldana. Chair not voting simply due to absence. Call the absent members.
Simitian?
Aye.
Simitian, aye. Corbett? Aye. Corbett, aye. Hancock? Aye. Hancock, aye. Lowenthal? 6-0.
6-0. We will leave that item on call for absent members. Item number 4, AB 1824 by Assemblymember Monning. The vote is 5-0.
Runner?
This is the Monning measure. Okay. Any other absent members?
Lowenthal?
All right. 5-0. We're going to hold that item open for absent members. Consent calendar consists of item numbers 5 and 9 members. This is the AB 1846 by Assemblymember Emmanuel Perez and AB 2776, the Water Parks and Wildlife Bill. These measures are on consent. The current vote is 5-0. Call the absent members.
Runner? Runner, aye. Strickland? Aye. Strickland, aye. 7-0.
Consent calendar is approved on a 7-0 basis. That takes us to item number 6. This is AB 2202 by Emmanuel Perez. 5-0 is the current vote. Chair voting aye. Call the absent members.
Runner? Strickland? Aye. Strickland, aye. 6-0.
6-0. That bill is out. Close the roll. Takes us to item number 7. Assemblymember Nilo. Current vote is?
4-1.
Call the absent members.
Lowenthal? Pavley?
4-1. That bill has sufficient votes, but we're going to leave the roll open for the absent members. File item number 8, AB 2379, Assemblymember Fuhrer.
Present vote, 5-0.
Call the absent members.
Lowenthal? Pavley?
5-0 has sufficient, but we're going to leave the roll open for the absent members. That brings us to item number 10, AJR 26 by Assemblymember Chesbro. Assembly members here, let's ask him to step up. Assemblymember Chesbro, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Thank you for the opportunity to present my Assembly Joint Resolution 26. AJR 26 urges the United States Congress, as it contemplates how to address climate change at the national level, to create a comprehensive plan and funding for states to address climate change impacts. We know that climate change is already affecting California in major ways. Sea levels have risen by as much as 7 inches along the California coast over the last century. These impacts are increasing erosion, degrading water quality, and threatening fish and marine life and their food webs in ways that we have just begun to fully understand. California has taken steps to recognize the importance of addressing climate impacts. Today, the Natural Resources Agency, in coordination with other state agencies, has recently developed the state's first strategy to identify and prepare for these occurring and expected climate change impacts. It's imperative to urge Congress to support California's and other states' strategies to address climate change impacts and to fund implementation of such strategies for the health of our precious natural resources and the communities that depend on them. This resolution highlights the need to take action in planning for the real effects of climate change in California's economy, natural resources, and human communities. I would urge your aye vote.
Thank you. Do we have witnesses in support?
Yes, Crystal Molenkamp on behalf of the Nature Conservancy in Audubon, California, in support. We think that federal funds to help the state address potentially costly and devastating climate impacts are critical. And this resolution really sends that message to Congress as it considers various climate change policy proposals, some of which would comprehensively address climate change impacts and provide funding to states like ours, and others that would not. And for that reason, we would urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have witnesses in opposition? Our understanding was there is no opposition. Witnesses in opposition? If not, are we ready for a motion? Motion by Corbett. Thank you. Call the roll.
She's moving. She's moving the bill.
Simidian?
Simidian, aye. Members roll.
Simidian, aye. Runner? Runner, no. Corbett? Corbett, aye. Hancock? Hancock, aye. Lowenthal? Lowenthal, aye. Pavley? Strickland? No. Strickland, no. 4 yes, 2 no.
4 yes, 2 no. You have sufficient votes. We're going to call that a close the roll. That bill is out. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members.
Members, we have just a few items that we're going to lift the call on very briefly for members who have been absent. File item 3, AB 1674 by Assemblymember Saldana. We have a 6-0 vote. Call the absent members.
Lowenthal? Aye. Lowenthal, aye. 7-0.
7-0. That bill is out. File item 4. This is AB 1824 by Assemblymember Monning. We have a 5-0 vote. Call the absent members.
Lowenthal? Aye. Lowenthal, aye. 6-0.
6-0. That bill is out. File item 7. AB 2328 by Nilo. The bill has a 4-1 vote. Call the absent members. Chair voted aye. There were 3 amendments taken consistent with the staff recommendation in the analysis, and the vote is 4-1 at present.
Lowenthal? Aye. Lowenthal, aye. Pavley?
5-1, that bill is out. Takes us to item number 8. This is by Assemblymember Fuhr. The current vote is 5-0. Call the absent members.
Lowenthal?
Which one is that? Excuse me.
Item number 8, AB 2379.
Lowenthal, aye. Pavley?
6-0. That bill is out. Members, let me check with staff. I believe that that is all of the items on our agenda and that we have closed the roll on all items, including the consent calendar.
Yes.
All right. Then without objection, the meeting is adjourned.